If you like our short stories, please like, comment, and subscribe for more. The Forgotten Return. The day Lucas Connolly was found was an accident. A chilling, earth-shattering accident. It had been 20 long years since Lucas had disappeared, his memory lingering in brimstone like a half-forgotten nightmare. He had been 16, a typical teenager with a mischievous grin and a future full of promise, until he vanished while walking home from school. No signs of foul play, no leads, no closure, just gone, as if he'd been erased from existence. The town searched for months. His parents plastered flyers everywhere, their faces growing hollow with grief as the years passed with no word, no hope. After a while, the name Lucas Connolly became a ghost story, a reminder of what could happen, a tale parents told their children to keep them from wandering off. But then, 2 boys broke into the old McAllister house, an abandoned relic that sat on the edge of town, long forgotten. They weren't supposed to be there, of course. No one had set foot inside the McAllister place in decades. It was the kind of house that loomed at the edge of your peripheral vision, decaying and sagging with the weight of untold stories. But the boys, searching for a place to hide and drink their stolen beers, stumbled across something no one expected to find. Behind a locked door in a back room no one knew existed, they found Lucas. It was the scream that alerted the neighbors, who called the police. When Sheriff McGraw arrived at the scene, it was like stepping into a nightmare. There, huddled in the corner of a dingy, dimly lit room, was Lucas Connolly. His body was thin, his hair long and streaked with gray. He wasn't 16 anymore. He was 36, but he looked far older. His skin clung to his bones like paper, his eyes sunken, dark circles etched beneath them. He didn't react to their presence. He simply stared at the wall, his lips moving silently, as if repeating something only he could hear. They broke down the door and pulled him from the house, but Lucas never resisted. It was like he wasn't there anymore, like whatever Lucas had once been had long since faded. The news spread like wildfire. Lucas Connolly has been found. Bomb. His parents rushed to the hospital, tears streaming down their faces as they tried to reconcile the broken man before them with the boy they'd lost. And though the town welcomed him back, murmurs of unease lingered beneath the surface. Something wasn't right. Lucas wasn't just traumatized. He was different. The first disappearance happened a week after Lucas came home. Joey Randall, 32, had just celebrated his birthday. He'd spent the evening with his family, blowing out candles and laughing over beers with friends. By morning, Joey was gone. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence that he had left his home voluntarily. He had simply vanished, as if the earth had swallowed him whole. It wasn't the first time someone had disappeared in Brimstone. People remembered all too well the string of vanishings that had plagued the town years ago, right around the time Lucas went missing. But this felt different. Joey's disappearance came on the exact day of his birthday, down to the hour. Then it happened again. Karen Mills, 67, went missing after a small family gathering for her birthday. Her son found her bedroom empty the next morning, the window still locked from the inside. No one had seen or heard anything unusual. The pattern began to emerge. Birthdays. Each person who vanished did so within hours of celebrating another year of life. As the number of missing people grew, panic spread through the town like wildfire. And still, Lucas said nothing. He sat quietly in his childhood home, staring out the window, as if waiting for something. Or someone. Sheriff McGraw was no stranger to the bizarre. Brimstone had seen its fair share of unexplained phenomena over the years. But this was something else. He couldn't ignore the timing. Lucas had been found, and now, just like before, people were disappearing. But there was one crucial difference this time. Every single victim vanished on their birthday. The sheriff had known Lucas since he was a kid. He remembered the search, the hopelessness that followed when they couldn't find him. But the man who had returned wasn't the boy he remembered. Lucas barely spoke, and when he did, his words were strange, cryptic, as though he was fighting to keep something buried. It didn't take long for the town to start pointing fingers. Whispers spread, Lucas is behind this. He brought something back with him. His parents, once pillars of the community, were shunned, their house turning into a ghostly island on the outskirts of town. Sheriff McGraw wasn't one for superstition, but something gnawed at him. He had to talk to Lucas. It was late when McGraw knocked on the Connolly's front door. Lucas answered, his movements slow, deliberate. The sheriff hadn't been this close to him since the day they found him. And now, standing face to face with the man, McGraw felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Lucas," McGraw began, stepping inside. "We need to talk." Lucas didn't respond at first. He led the sheriff into the living room and sat down, his eyes drifting toward the window. The silence between them was thick, oppressive, like the room itself was holding its breath. "People are disappearing," McGraw said bluntly, watching for a reaction. "They've gone missing on their birthdays. You have to know something, son. You're the only one who can help." For a long moment, Lucas said nothing. Then, in a voice so quiet it barely reached McGraw's ears, he spoke. "I didn't want to come back." McGraw's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? You were locked away, Lucas. You were taken." "I shouldn't have been found," Lucas continued, his gaze distant. "I wasn't supposed to leave that room. It let me go, but it didn't let me go free." "What let you go?" McGraw's heart pounded in his chest. "Who's behind this?" Lucas turned to face him, his eyes empty, like deep, bottomless wells. "The man who took me wasn't just a man. He was something else. He kept me there in that room for years. I don't know how long. I lost track of time. I don't even know who I am anymore." The sheriff felt a shiver run down his spine. "What did he do to you?" "He told me things," Lucas whispered, his voice trembling. "He got inside my head. He made me forget. But there was always one thing he made sure I remembered. I wasn't taken just to be kept away. I was taken for a purpose." McGraw's stomach twisted. "What purpose?" "To take others." 20 years earlier, Lucas had been held captive by a man, or something that wore the skin of a man. His captor had locked him away in that room, but it wasn't to torture him, at least not in the traditional sense. He never harmed Lucas physically, but he had a darker agenda. The man believed in something ancient, something far older than the town itself. He believed in control over life and death, in the power of souls. He chose Lucas specifically, because on his birthday, Lucas's soul was the perfect sacrifice, the perfect vessel for the ritual the man had been performing for decades. The disappearances had been part of this twisted process, each person vanishing on their birthday because that was when their soul was most tied to the earth. Lucas was brainwashed, slowly and methodically. His sense of self was erased, replaced by the man's teachings, his dark purpose. For years, the man whispered to him, manipulating his mind, bending his will. By the time Lucas was broken enough to obey, the man had what he wanted, control over Lucas's actions, his very thoughts. But before the man could finish what he started, Lucas was found, freed from the room but not from the programming the man had instilled in him. Lucas had become an instrument, a vessel for the same power that had taken him. And now, back in the town, he had no choice but to continue what the man had started, taking people on their birthdays, fulfilling the same ritual that had bound him. "I don't want to do it," Lucas whispered, tears streaming down his face. "But he's still there, in my head. He tells me who to take. He tells me when." The sheriff's blood ran cold. "You've been taking them? You're the reason they're disappearing?" Lucas's sobs grew louder. "I don't remember doing it. I wake up and they're gone. I don't know how to stop it." McGraw stood, pacing the room, trying to make sense of the horror unraveling before him. Lucas wasn't the boy he had once known. He had been transformed into something far darker, something enslaved to a power he didn't understand. And that power was growing stronger with each person who vanished. "Lucas, you're not beyond help," the sheriff said, though his voice wavered. "We can fight this. We can stop him." Lucas shook his head, his hands trembling. "You can't stop it. He's too strong. He'll come for me again. He'll take me back." As the disappearances mounted, the town of Brimstone descended into fear. Birthdays were no longer a cause for celebration. They were a death sentence. People tried to hide, locking themselves away on their birthdays, but it didn't matter. When the clock struck, they were gone, snatched from the world without a sound, without a trace. Lucas grew more and more unstable. He would disappear for hours, returning with no memory of where he had been. Each time someone vanished, Lucas would fall deeper into his despair, his mind fracturing as the captor's voice continued to haunt him. He couldn't escape the man's influence, no matter how far he ran or how hard he fought. The sheriff knew the only way to end this was to confront the source, the man who had taken Lucas, the figure who still controlled him from the shadows. But finding him was a different matter altogether. One night, as the wind howled through the streets and the town huddled in fear, McGraw received a call. Lucas was gone. His parents had found his bed empty, his window open, the air outside cold and biting. But there was something else. A note scrawled in shaky handwriting left on Lucas's pillow. "It's time." And Sheriff McGraw raced to the McAllister house, his gut telling him that Lucas had gone back. The house stood like a specter at the edge of town, its windows dark, its walls sagging with age. He had no backup, no plan, just the desperate hope that he could stop whatever was happening before it claimed Lucas for good. Inside, the air was thick with an unnatural chill. The floor creaked beneath his boots as he made his way through the decaying halls, his flashlight flickering in the oppressive darkness. He called Lucas's name, but the only response was the echo of his own voice. And then he heard it, a faint whisper, coming from the same room where Lucas had been found. McGraw's heart pounded as he approached the door. It was locked, just as it had been before, but this time the sheriff didn't hesitate. He kicked it open, the wood splintering under the force of his boot. Inside, Lucas stood in the center of the room, his back to the door, his body shaking with sobs. The shadows in the room seemed to pulse, shifting and twisting as though they were alive. And standing in the corner, barely visible in the dim light, was the man. Tall, skeletal, his face shrouded in darkness. The captor. The entity. McGraw raised his gun, his hands trembling. "Let him go!" The man didn't move, didn't speak. He simply raised a long, bony finger and pointed at Lucas. Lucas turned, his face pale and tear-streaked. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I can't fight him." Before the sheriff could react, the shadows surged forward, engulfing Lucas in their cold, suffocating embrace. He was lifted off the ground, his body convulsing as the man's power took hold of him once more. "No!" McGraw shouted, firing his gun, but the bullets passed through the figure as though he were made of smoke. Lucas's eyes met the sheriff's one last time, filled with a haunting resignation. He'll never stop. And then he was gone. By morning, the disappearances had stopped, but Lucas was never seen again. Neither was the man who had taken him. The town of Brimstone was left to wonder if they had been saved, or if the curse had simply claimed its final victim. And though the disappearances ceased, the fear never did, because birthdays still came and went, and the town would always remember the one boy who vanished and then returned, bringing something far darker with him. The end.